To be honest, on their date, I started to see some cracks to their compatibility in terms of how they were talking about pragmatism.
It just feels like a younger relationship to me. I'm like kind of surprised that they're 1672 because this is this exact same storyline that we see between a lot of people
All the time.
in their mid-20s.
Hi everyone, I'm Julie, she's Kelly, and we're here to find love. We're back again this week for another Bachelor recap. Today we're recapping episode 8 of the Golden Bachelor and Bachelor in Paradise season 9. For those of you who don't know us, we're two dating coaches who analyze the relationship psychology and dating themes in reality TV shows, especially all of the Bachelor shows. So if you like this kind of stuff, hit the subscribe button to follow along and join the conversation.
So let's start off with the Golden Bachelor. We are in Fantasy Suites week, and I feel like this was a week that people were looking forward to or very intrigued by because it's folks in their 60s and 70s, and the question is like, how will they handle Fantasy Suites week? Like, what will they or won't they do? And I really liked that Gerry kind of called out that intrigue. He was very directly at the very start of the episode, him and Jesse sit down and he's just kind of like, I know everyone's wondering about this, but one, it's none of your business what we do. And two, yes, people in their 60s and 70s have sex. If that's what your question is, yes, we have sex. That is a thing. And I really appreciated that just like direct call out and just saying it very point blank. I love having this spotlight on the subject of sexuality in our older years. We've talked about this before as we've been covering the Golden Bachelor, but there's just so many harmful stereotypes about older folks that are just passed around as if they're like blanket truths, one of which is the total like desexualization of people over the age of like 60. But the truth is, you know, we know from research plenty of folks in their 60s, 70s, 80s have active sex lives. And so I love that we're getting this representation of sexually active seniors here on our screen because this is totally a possibility for what our senior years can look like. So I loved just Gerry's whole approach to this week. I was just very pleasantly surprised by. I also, no shade on Gerry, I didn't really expect him to be as sex positive as he seemed. He was just really giving a lot of sex positivity, just in like the subtle ways that he was talking about sex. Like at one point, who was it? I think Jesse was asking Gerry like his thoughts on intimacy, and Gerry was like, define intimacy. And Jesse like was like, oh no, I don't know what to do. But I actually really appreciated the question because people of course throw these words around like intimacy, and it can mean different things to different people. And I like that Gerry was just very willing to really be inquisitive about the language that we use to talk about sex, the assumptions that are there. I just really appreciated his openness to talk about sexuality. Even when Leslie later like poses this question to him of like, when was the last time you had sex? At first he was like a little bit embarrassed that he was asked such a direct question, but I like that his next question was sex by myself or sex with someone else, which, you know, sounds like it's a joke, but the truth is, of course, the sex that we have with ourselves is also sex, right? And I like that Gerry is just like very casually just dropping these really, I don't know, progressive ways to talk about sexuality, right? And acknowledging that, you know, solo sex is great and true. And so, I don't know, I was just impressed by all the little tiny things he was saying and all the little tiny ways he was approaching this week.
Yeah, Gerry was very much almost mentoring Jesse through that conversation. Jesse just had this impression of, oh my gosh, my grandpa is talking about sex. How do I bring up sex to someone? And I really loved how Gerry immediately normalized the idea of saying, hey, if you're still alive, it's not a weird thing. If you don't get too old to like have those expressions of physicality with yourself or with others. So I really did like how that conversation, it was very simple. It was a little bit oh my gosh, I'm a little bit embarrassed to talk about it, like with Jesse and Gerry, but it did go a long way in hopefully dispelling myths that if you're over the age of like Bachelor in Paradise things, if you're older than 30, it's like your life is over. And that's so not true. And I loved how Gerry was actively saying, hey, of course, I like still enjoy it. Nothing is different besides the fact that I'm like in my 60s now.
Funnily enough, even though Fantasy Suites is baked into the Bachelor process. I feel like every time we get to Fantasy Suites Week, it's always like so tense and everyone's like very weird about the sex and whether people are and aren't having sex. And I really liked how kind of chill all three of them were about it, both Gerry and also Theresa and Leslie. They were just kind of, we are exploring our relationship, what we do or don't do is our business, and also like it's chill if we choose to have sex, like, and it's chill if we don't choose to have sex. And I just it was the chillness of it that really, I don't know, I feel like they handled it better than most of the people who are in their 20s and 30s who are on this show on Fantasy Suites Week. But then we get to the actual dates, and my sweet baby boy Gerry, oh my goodness, that man, I mean, I guess he knows what to do and how to talk about sex, but when it came to what he was saying to the women in terms of his relationships with them, my goodness, this man was saying too much. Like, Jesus Christ, what he was saying to... So he started with Leslie and had their fantasy suite date first, and it went phenomenally, and he was just really professing his love to her.
I think you're the one. I think you're that one.
Was too much, don't you think?
I felt like Gerry could have taken some advice from Kathy. Just zip it. Don't reveal too much. You're still protecting them to a certain extent. And this episode, just like with the whole Faith breakup, was when I started to see some of Gerry's faults with like over communication or being too present, because I do think he was over promising a lot to Leslie, but he still had to stay with Theresa, which he admittedly said he needed to still explore. So I felt that was not great for Gerry to say so much to Leslie. And to be honest, on their date, I started to see some cracks to their compatibility in terms of how they were talking about pragmatism and their lives and depth they wanted to build together. One of my key takeaways from Gerry was that he and Tony's relationship is clearly extremely genuine. He knows what it's like to have true love of someone and to build a life with somebody and to connect and have deep conversations that are life-affirming. I felt like Leslie has not had the same experience in her past relationships, and it was more so her being attracted to Gerry's safety and his overall presence versus maybe truly being super captivated by him. She was not really able to participate in that conversation in a way that felt like it was deep. It was more of her crying about her exes or her two past marriages or always feeling like she's going to be alone, which to me would be a little bit of a red flag in terms of, okay, you're still, it's been decades and you've still never really felt safe in a relationship. So then to Gerry, I would just wonder, are you dating me for me as a person and what you want to build with me because you know that we can truly be in love, or am I healing you? Am I teaching you something? That's a much different dynamic than I think Gerry's looking for. Gerry is much older and he really knows what it's like to commit to someone and prioritize his life to somebody so thoroughly. Yeah. I did not get that impression from Leslie. Leslie felt like she was still hurt by a lot of things that happened in her past. And then after the fantasy suites, I think in her ITM, she said that Gerry felt comfortable like an old shoe. Oh, that is not the sexiest or the most appealing or the most infatuated thing to say to somebody. So I do think Leslie really, really likes him and loves him. I just don't know if she wants to have that same paradigm of relationship of just really committing to someone and being in that ease, or if she's kind of using Gerry, and I say using in a very loose way, it's an exploration of her to heal herself and for her to be around someone that can take care of her in a really sweet way. That's love. I just don't know if that's the love that Gerry is looking for in this phase of his life.
Yeah, there is certainly maybe like a one-sidedness in terms of like, you know, in relationships we give and take from each other, right? There's mutual, you know, something that we benefit from the other person. We each give something to the other person. We each benefit from the relationship and from being with the other person in different ways. And I felt very much like Leslie will gain a lot from being with Gerry, but I'm not quite sure what Gerry gains from being with Leslie. I mean, that's harsh. I mean, I do think there's actually things that he gains from being with Leslie. It's just she is exciting and interesting. I do think his feelings for her seem very genuine and sparkly in a way. He feels very passionate about her in a way that I'm sure feels really good for him. So he does get something from the relationship. But I do agree with what you're saying, that her inability to form secure attachments throughout her life, it does make you wonder what healing she needs to do, and if she is seeing Gerry as her path to healing as opposed to going through an individual healing journey to figure out why she is forming these insecure attachments with people over and over throughout the course of her life. I feel like she needs to do that by herself first before she can or not first. It could happen simultaneously, but she does need to do some individual work to figure out what happened and how to heal, and not feel like she's saying like, oh my goodness, every birthday I'm just so lonely. I just keep wishing I'm going to be with someone. Like, all of it does seem like there is some unhealed wounds there, and a person can't be the solution to all your problems. Like a person can't be the one thing that's going to heal all your trauma. And she does seem to be kind of looking at Gerry and her life with Gerry as the solution. And that is where we get into tricky territory. Even though I do actually think they would be a great couple. I do actually think that they would be really sweet together and very, I don't know, I think they would have a really good, fun life with each other. But I do worry that maybe the dynamic might feel a little bit imbalanced over time. They might start to feel, or Gerry might start to feel that imbalance. And given the fact that, you know, their relationship is still a bit of a question mark, I really was not disappointed in Gerry, but I really just wish he hadn't said as much as he had to Leslie in that moment. To your point, he is a man who is really present, which is usually a great thing in a relationship. It's great to be really present with someone and really present in your relationship, but he is kind of forgetting the larger context when he's in the moment with any individual person. It's like he was in that moment with Leslie, and it's like he forgot Theresa existed, and he just was running his mouth. And that is, it's dangerous. It's general. Even if Theresa didn't exist, it is, I can't hammer this point in enough. It is dangerous to just talk and say words because you're feeling a big feeling, like, and just make all these promises to someone and not think about the repercussions of saying that stuff to them before you're ready to actually make a commitment. Because at the end of the day, Gerry is still not ready to make a commitment to Leslie, so he should not be saying those things to her. He just shouldn't. He is setting her up to get extremely hurt if later down the line he decides not to be with her. And, you know, the fact that he moves on to Theresa's date and he's like, I really need to try hard to be open-minded with Theresa. I really, really want to try to do that. The fact that he even has that mentality with Theresa is proof that he should not have said it, what he said to Leslie. Because if you are still going to try to be open-minded to another person, do not say to someone, you are the one. Like, don't say that. It's just too much. You gotta be able to reel that in no matter how much you're feeling in that moment. You have to be a little bit, it's not that you have to be withheld, but you have to be careful and cautious with the things that you're saying to someone. Because if he doesn't pick Leslie, if I was Leslie, I would be broken after the things that he has said to her.
I would be pissed. Because he said, you're the one, I want to wake up with you, I'm so in love with you, I want to build a life with you, this feels so easy, it feels so great. He's not hedging his bets against a very real possibility that Theresa could surprise him, and that's what she did do on their date. So I think Gerry, because he was so wanting to give affirmation to Leslie, he didn't do a good enough job. Maybe he did during the overnight when there weren't any cameras. but he didn't do a good job in telling her, I am still in this process and I am still seeing someone else. But what I can tell you is that in my time with you, I feel really connected to you, and I know I need to make the best decision for myself, and I want, he didn't really go down that direction. I think that he was too busy kind of confirming to her a lot of promises that he can't quite deliver on yet. And if he did, maybe he should have sent Theresa home before the overnight. If he did feel that strongly about Leslie, that's what it would indicate, that kind of commitment or that follow through of, okay, I know it's Leslie. I keep saying it's Leslie. I've promised her the moon at this point. Why am I still leading on Theresa? So that's the tension that Gerry is in, and Gerry not being able to be thoughtful navigating that. I'm going to give him credit. He's older. He hasn't really dated. He's only been with one person for most of his life. I get it. But this is I do think that he shouldn't have let his guards down so completely and fully with each of them. There's a little bit of him, I think, still holding a card to his chest that he needs to activate and keep in mind, but he is not doing that, and he hasn't really done it since Faith, and he didn't really learn his lesson from what happened with Faith. I feel like he's still charging ahead with, I'm emotionally going to disclose everything and then deal with it afterwards, after I need to think about, both people.
And, there's a way to do it. There's a way to be really in the moment and, leaning into those emotions without making promises, which are different, right?
Right.
I think you're the one. That's a promise. You're setting up an expectation that you're going to pick her at the end. Very different from saying, wow, I could really imagine waking up every morning with you, and I feel like I would be so happy if that is what happens. That would be something that I know would bring me so much joy. You can be really evocative and emotional and really show how much you like someone without making any insinuation that there is a commitment at the end of that feeling. That's something I think all of us need to figure out in our own dating lives, is figuring out how we can be present, which is a good thing, and it's fun. Of course, that's the whole point of dating. You want to enjoy those good squishy feelings when you're in the moment, and it's oh my God, it's romantic and we're both just so in it. I get it. You should enjoy it. And also, you need to figure out how to do that without setting that person up to get really, really hurt later down the line if you are going to back out the next day, which is kind of what could happen with Gerry and Leslie. It's that fine balance that we have to find. And it's not saying that it's easy by any means, but it is something that I think we're called to when we are being intimate with someone, right? Because you're holding their heart in your hands and you gotta be careful with it.
Yeah, I was really surprised when he had his date of Theresa and he indicated so many hesitations around her in terms of, is this relationship deepening? We haven't really had a lot of conversations. I'm thinking about Leslie on this date with Theresa. I need to it felt like he was stealing himself and just being I just have to go through the motions to just make sure that I'm choosing the right person. And I get that, but the comparison of that is really heartbreaking for both women to experience, because Theresa is giving it her all and she is so clearly invested in Gerry in a way that he isn't 1,000% invested in her quite yet. So on their date, I was really surprised that first Gerry was so hesitant about Theresa, because it made me feel like maybe Faith was really his true top two, but maybe he brought Theresa on because it's always a little less heartbreaky for the second person, maybe, if he's not as interested in it. So then that would make a lot of sense why he's co-signing so much of Leslie, right? But then it surprised me because, Theresa is just surprising in general. Seeing her with the family, it did make me warm up to her. It never excused her naive behavior, but I'm noticing her and Gerry have that in common. They have this innocence in the way that they're approaching and doing things.
That's really true.
Right? It's a little bit naive, and it's a little bit like they're giving the exact same kind of innocence towards each other. So, okay, I can see why that's really compelling. They've both been widowed, very compelling. Theresa has really only been with one person for most of her life, just like Gerry. So there is a little bit of that shadow of maybe if he's thinking about who Tony would want him to be with, Tony might want him to be with somebody that can love him unconditionally forever. I can see Theresa completely being his ride or die and absolutely moving to Indiana and doing a lot more concessions than I think maybe the other two women like Faith and Leslie would have done. Her job was surprising for Gerry, and her being this day trader that beat out all of these young 30-year-olds also really, really impressive. Like for Theresa to...
interesting.
Wasn't that so? That angle to Theresa, it gave her like a really cool edge. It shows that she's not this soft like crybaby grandma type. It really felt like she was this boss babe who understood, I'm going to get a career, but not just any career, a competitive finance career in my 60s or 70s. So that Gerry was surprised by her.
I completely think that Theresa, I think, surprised a lot of us on this date. I mean, it did say under her little name tag the whole season, securities professional. So I did know that she worked, I guess, in securities. But one, I didn't actually understand that was financial securities. Yeah. I was like, does she work in the security department?
At Kohl's?
I was like, what does that mean? But, you know, hearing the story did make me think of her differently. Like, I feel like production maybe or the editing has really painted her in a certain way, but it was such a cool twist to hear that she is, in fact, like a really cool corporate career baddie. Like, that was an interesting twist for her. Even Gerry seemed kind of surprised to hear that story of, like, she was a homemaker, but then she needed to get health insurance for her family, so she got this job in finance and has just like risen the ranks and is doing really cool stuff. I mean, the whole thing was very discordant, I think, with how at least I had been seeing Theresa, and I think how a lot of people had been seeing Theresa, and maybe even how Gerry had been seeing Theresa. And so I feel like that was a bit of a turning point maybe for him and Theresa's relationship, where he, maybe to your point, maybe before he kind of brought her along because he thought it would be easier to dump her on the proposal stage than it would be to dump Faith on the proposal stage. But then in this moment, because he was so committed to being open-minded, which doesn't make sense to me if he was so in on Leslie. I don't know why he was so committed to being so open-minded, but he was so committed to being open-minded to Theresa, and he was so committed to being open-minded that it worked. And we, you know, and that's the funny thing. I mean, the truth is people are interesting. And like, if you let yourself be open to learning more about them, they tend to be really interesting the more you learn. And so Theresa, you know, showed us an interesting side of her. And I did get the sense after their overnight that there was even more off camera that they were able to talk about. Also, by the way, the fact that she hasn't had sex with anyone since her husband passed, for her to be willing to be intimate with Gerry, I think is a really big deal. It doesn't sound like this was the case for Gerry. He kind of made it sound like he has maybe been intimate with other people since the passing of his wife. That was just like the sense I got. But for Theresa, this was her first time, so this is a really big deal, and I'm sure Gerry would understand the weight of that and would be thoughtful about how he would, you know, approach that situation. So if they did have sex, that to me would be a pretty big indicator that he's pretty serious about her. And so, yeah, I do feel like that that whole date seemed to change maybe the trajectory of where this is all going. I was very much like, I think Leslie is going to be the one. Now I'm confused, to your point. I am a little bit, who do you think he's going to pick? I just don't know.
I have no idea. Gerry is very confusing to me now. He is no longer predictable. I think that his inability to maybe be a little bit more calculating at this point is making it very confusing to understand exactly who he's gunning for, because he is I'm going to be dedicated to being present, open-minded, and emotionally revealing. So therefore, he's having these really different relationships with these women, and he's both putting them, he's like really like putting them on this path of, I'm going to choose you. So it makes it really hard for me to feel who is he actually more into. I will say that Gerry has shown to me just through some very subtle cues that he is very pragmatic, practical, and responsible. He retired early. I think he retired at 59. He has been with one person for a majority of his life, and I think they had several businesses together. There's something about him that probably really values that from Theresa, who I think compatibility-wise, they make a lot of sense in how they've lived their life. And even though they've done different things, there is a little bit of a symbolic cue that they have very similar values. With Theresa being like, okay, if I have to get something done, I'm going to not only get a job, but like a badass job, and I'm going to be amazing and kind of like slay that job. That is very unexpected for Theresa to really match Gerry in that way. So I think from that aspect, he could just maybe, if he's looking for practicality, I think Theresa is a great match that he will know she will be with him forever. With Leslie, I also think that's a great match, but it feels a little bit more like there's going to be more emotional drama, and it's not in a bad way where they're fighting and insecure. I think it'll just be Leslie will be healing a lot within that relationship, and that's a very specific relationship. Does he want to have that kind of dynamic with someone? Does he want to hold space for someone that way? Does he just want to travel and hang out with his kids and have a more experiential life? Or does he want to have this very emotional, deep, healing life? And I'm not saying he can't have that with Theresa. I'm just saying that Leslie's wounds are showing a lot more than Theresa's are.
That's a really good analysis. As you were describing that, they kind of remind me, I feel like Gerry and Leslie's relationship feels almost like it's like a high school relationship. Or not high school, it would be like a mid-20s relationship. Like you've been traumatized by your past relationships. And like
we've all been there.
Right. It's like you're old enough to have like some relationship history where you've been kind of traumatized and like you're broken, and then there's this guy who swoops in and like you expect him to just heal all your problems, fix everything. That's what that really, it just feels like a younger relationship to me. I'm like kind of surprised that they're 16, 72, because this is this exact same storyline that we see between a lot of people
all the time
in their mid-20s. And in comparison, you're right, Theresa, she's like, she's got it. She's all cleaned up. Her life is great. She's thriving. She's just kind of got everything, all her ducks in a row. She's really cool and accomplished. She's like, I could retire. I could not retire. I could just keep being a badass. Like whatever. Like she's just like kind of, she's very much settled into her life. She's like, I've been dating all these guys. A lot of them liked me. I didn't like them, so I said no. Like, that's what Theresa's giving. Like, she's giving security. She really is. She's giving, I have this very abundant life, and you feel like someone I would like to invite into it and to share that with. It's not that I need you, you know? And so there is something about that is interesting and appealing in a very different way from... It just feels like a more mature relationship in a lot of ways than the relationship between Leslie and Gerry. Not to say that there's anything wrong with that. The relationship that the two of them are reminding me of actually is Zach and Katie. Katie, like from Zach's season, because Katie also was coming in hot with like a lot. She has so much like issues with men in her life. A lot of like people who have cheated on her, treated her poorly, like all this like fathers figures who have left her. She's had so many issues, and she was like, Zach is gonna fix everything. I feel safe with you, and that's why I want to be with you. And I remember we had this whole discussion around the relationship of like, you know, if feeling safe with someone is like kind of the bare minimum that you need in a like it's the baseline of a relationship. That shouldn't be why you choose to be with someone. And Leslie and Gerry's relationship feels very similar to that. Now, granted, Zach and Katie are thriving, so, you know, it's not to say that it can't work. Like, it totally can, but it's just a very different type of relationship. And to your point, it's just going to become a question of what is Gerry looking for? Someone who is practical, has the same values, and who is going to really fit perfectly into his life, which is the Theresa angle, or is it more the Leslie kind of emotional highs and lows, like a little bit of like a mid-20s type of relationship, which can totally work. No one's saying that it can't. It's just a little bit, it's a different path. And which path is he going to go for? That is the question.
Yeah, let us know in the comments down below because I'm genuinely so curious. I have no idea what Gerry values more right now because he is, I mean, there is something about him that feels like he likes being that guy that swoops in and can promise you that you're never going to be alone again and I'm always going to wake up with you. And there's that attraction to that role, right? I think he really loves that. But I do think maybe he's surprised that with Theresa, she is so practically, logistically, perfect on paper, compatible with him. I don't know if he's feeling the same physical attraction that he feels of Leslie with Theresa, but to that point, I don't know if Leslie is super attracted to Gerry as much as she just feels very safe with Gerry. And it's just a lot more question marks. And I mean, when I was watching the episode, I thought, damn, if Joan was on the season still, or Ellen, they just seem like much better matches versus with Gerry. Because, I mean, Leslie and Theresa are so polar opposite, which I really think Joan and Ellen would have fallen a lot more in the middle and maybe been more appropriate, or it just would have made a lot more sense. Not like these don't, it's just so oppositional in such a clear, stark way.
Yeah, no, you're right. They are. Or Faith! I mean, Faith is somewhere
would
in the
have been
middle
great.
too. It'll be interesting to see what happens. Yeah, let us know down below. Who do you think he's going to pick, Theresa or Leslie, and who do you think he should pick? By the way, if you've watched to this point in the video and you aren't subscribed yet, make sure you hit that subscribe button. We do this every single week. We recap every single episode of every single season of The Bachelor, Golden Bachelor, Bachelor in Paradise, all of it. So make sure you are subscribed so you don't miss a video.
All right, now it's time for Bachelor in Paradise, and we are approaching the end. So one of the biggest things that I wanted to dive into was the injustice that Rachel has been receiving on the beach. I do think she was one of the main characters of the episode last night, and not in a good way. It's very clear from editing and maybe people on the beach that there is a sense of, they can sense her insecurity from her season. And I think they really gave a lot of space to not only sense her insecurity, but to call it out. So Rachel has not been having a good time. I think that everything that happened with Brayden, that was never really resolved. They ended up their very small spark ended up not even being a thing. They don't even really talk on the beach anymore. She had a friendship rose with Tanner, and then Tanner was telling her that he maybe liked her, wanting to explore things more with her, but then throughout the episode, I think treated her in a very cruel, callous, dismissive way. And then she was going on dates with people like Jordan, who she had sent home and didn't give a rose to at her season. So I just feel like right now what I'm noticing is that Rachel, being on the beach, having to maybe rematch with some of her rejects, like in terms of the people that she sent home, there might be this weird power dynamic where the men that she sent home get a little bit of I don't want to say payback, but they have an opportunity to now like reject Rachel or now to explore other options. So I think that Rachel's position on the beach is one of the worst positions on the beach right now. It is so clear that, from my impression, I don't think that her and Tanner have a connection at all. I think that it just felt very performative when he was telling her that he wanted to be with her, and that's why he gave her the rose, but it took her having to have a conversation with him versus him saying anything to her. All he did was give her the rose, but he never stated his intention for it. So I feel like Rachel I just want the girl to get off the beach. I feel for her. I think that this is so not the right format. Maybe the timing is a little bit off, but I have not been liking how she's been treated this entire season, and this episode really solidified it that maybe this franchise is not for her because of how they mistreat her.
That's a really good way of framing it. I hadn't thought of it in exactly that way, but you're right that there is a weird kind of power reversal thing going on with her and her men, and it's very different from when other past bachelors or bachelorettes have been on the beach, because it's very rare for a past lead to come on the beach and all of their exes are the other contestants are all people from their season. And so that's kind of what's going on with Rachel. There's like so many men from her season here, and that is, it's uncomfortable. It puts her in a weird position. You're right, of like, I rejected you guys, but, my season didn't work out. My relationship, the guy that I picked, it was not the right guy, And so it kind of makes her, she already is starting from kind of behind or kind of this position of a little bit of weakness per se. I don't think it should be that way. I don't think that's a fair characterization. I don't think she has anything to be ashamed of, but that is just the nature of, the politics, I guess, of the way the beach is working and the way that bachelor relationships work. That is a little bit of the politics of it. And so it does feel like she is in this real position of, you kind of maybe would have thought that she was going to be a hot commodity on the beach too. But one thing that has been very apparent to me since the beginning of the season, and it became a theme that people were talking about this episode, but I just feel like she has had her walls up the entire time she has been on this beach. It seems like she has been really trying hard to project a certain persona. I feel like she maybe internalized a lot of the very intense criticism and hate she got during her season, and that kind of makes me sad. But I do think that she really absorbed a lot of what people were saying about her. She read all of the critiques and all the mean tweets criticizing her decisions and her personality. She was primarily criticized for being too emotional and crying all the time and making bad decisions. Like, she was criticized for all kinds of things, honestly. And she was, of course, trashed for being unsuccessful in finding a partner at the end of her season. And so now I feel like she has approached Bachelor in Paradise with this kind of like chill, go with the flow attitude. Like, I feel like she's been kind of trying to portray this like carefree persona, kind of to like offset or like prove wrong or respond to the criticism that she received in her season. And she has been approaching every relationship so casually now because of that, because she doesn't want to get too attached to anyone. She doesn't want to put herself in a position to get hurt. She just seems like she has been, like, all of her relationships on the beach since Sean, like all of them, it feels like she's been so reluctant to lean in, and she has been purposefully kind of keeping them very casual. Even on her date with Jordan, people were like, ooh, like, this is exciting, like a second chance at this relationship that never got started. But even on that date, it's like she was laughing so much in a way that to me seemed to be an effort to diffuse any like actual romance. Like, she was like, they were like in these really intimate poses, like looking eye to eye, and she was like, like she was kind of trying to like diffuse any romantic tension buildup, as if she didn't want to seem like she was too into someone, because if she seems really into someone and then they don't turn out to be into her, she looks like a fool. And so she doesn't want to seem interested in anyone. But it's also been hurting her too, because that's also why, like, Brayden was like, oh, I thought me and Rachel were like more casual, and like Sean and Rachel, that was never a thing. Even with Tanner, it was like not clear. All of her relationship was like not clear if they're actually going to be a thing. And I think that's kind of because of her attitude going in. It's like she doesn't want to get the criticism that she received previously. And so it's like she's overcompensating by trying to seem super chill. I'm chill. I'm a chill girl. I don't cry. I'm a chill person. Like, that's kind of what she's been trying to project. And I just kind of find it sad, because it's like she got all this hate, and she's just like, okay, I'm going to take that as like actual notes of how to change my personality. And like, that's a really sad way to respond to hate. You know what I mean? Like,
oh, that's such an excellent call out about Rachel. I hadn't thought about her specifically internalizing the really harmful misogynistic messages from the media or from her season. And I think about her entire experience on the show and just how consistent in how maybe it plays to one of her wounds around not being chosen. Because I think about Clayton's season, when he told Gabby and Rachel that Susie had left because he had been intimate with all of them, or he had said, I love you, I forget. Rachel had gotten the rose, Gabby rejected hers, and she was like, I don't want to get a rose if it's this way. I don't want to be chosen by Clayton if it's because he can't get anyone else. And then on her season, her and Gabby were pitted against each other, where they had to hand out roses and men could say yes or no. They could go on either side. Really messed up. And now on this season, you're right, like all of these rejected candidates from her season now have an opportunity to have access to other women, just like what happened with Gabby, and they're still not choosing her with conviction. So I do think that Rachel has been waiting for a guy to be all in on her in a way that she can be all in on someone. And Brayden was maybe the closest to that, but I do think he was so hurt from Kat, or maybe he still liked Kat and he was trying to get over her, explore things with Becca. I'm not exactly sure how that went wrong, but it did feel like Rachel was waiting for something to let her guard down, and it was hard for her to realize that she was the one that had to keep putting herself out there, because how much can she continue to do that and then be told it's wrong, or for the guy to say yes but then not really do anything to co-create something with her and take it a step further. I feel like every guy is like, oh, okay, I'll do this, I'll do that, but they're not really looking at Rachel and saying, it's you and it's me and this is what I want to build together. She hasn't really had that experience. I'm just not really loving how the contestants and how editing and production is treating her, because she has already been through so much.
I am totally with you. It feels like she keeps getting put into positions intentionally by production of disempowerment, right? She's like, the Gabby and Rachel thing was already setting them both up for pain and failure and being kind of put down. That was like a way to put both of them down, really. And Rachel was the one who had the most emotional response to that, and I feel like production has like leaned into that, and I feel like people have also, to your point, kind of latched on to her insecurities. And the funny thing is that Tanner even seems to acknowledge this when the brief time when they were kind of trying to figure out if they were going to actually be serious about each other in this week's episode. He kind of gets her to open up about the trauma that she went through on her season of like, everyone knows that you have been through something, and of course you're still processing that. That was not that long ago. And he really kind of goes a layer deeper, goes below the surface of Bachelor in Paradise to be like, let's talk about how bad your experience has been on this fucking franchise. And she seems to feel so comforted by the fact that someone is acknowledging that, right? And that, to me, I think is the main reason why she was briefly like, I want to try this with you, because I think that she was like, oh, Tanner like understands how bad my thing was, this whole thing has been for me. He's not forcing me to be the cool girl. He is okay with me. Like, he sees the wounds and he still is interested in me. And she even says, I think in her, either to him or in the moment interview, that she says like, this is the most myself I have felt this whole time in that conversation. And I get it, because finally someone is acknowledging that like, you were put through some shit, now you have your walls up, and like, I see it, I get it, and also like, I want you to open up. And she even starts to say like, maybe I have been too cautious, maybe I've been trying to protect myself from more criticism or more hurt or more rejection, and I've been too withheld now. And she even starts to open herself up, only for this fucking guy Tanner. I'm sorry, this roast, when he comes in and he makes that comment about Rachel saying, you know, we all wish it was Gabby. I was like, oh, Tanner, that's it. I'm done with you. I'd never had a good feeling about you, but now I'm super done. That is ugly for you to say that. That is real nasty to say that. One, in general, but two, when you have just asked Rachel to put her guards down, you kind of asked her to be vulnerable, and she said, okay, I'm gonna be vulnerable with you, for you to then tear her down, use those exact insecurities from what happened to her in her past season against her in this public way. That was stinky. I really didn't like that he did that. And to your point, it just goes to show that I don't think this is the environment for Rachel to thrive. I think people are it's like these people know too much about
Yes.
the storyline that she has been through. It's kind of like, it's like, when you like go to college and it's like I get to be a new person because no one knows what I was like in high school, or you get to the the workplace and no one knows you, so you don't have to be the same persona you were in college, right? You get to kind of start fresh in a way, or you move to a new city, right? You get to kind of start fresh because people don't know all of the stories and the perceptions that people have had about you in the past, and you can kind of shed your old storylines. Rachel has not been given the opportunity to shed her old storylines. And in fact, all of these people keep bringing up her old storylines and using them as weapons against her. And you cannot move forward when everyone keeps kind of using your past against you. It's really, really hard to do that. And I think baby girl's got to get off this beach. I don't think this beach is going to be kind to her at all.
Mm-hmm. And I understand that it's a roast and there is an element of really being like digging into somebody and making light of something that they've been through or like their personality, fine. But I really find humor at someone else's expense the lowest denomination of humor. I think that if you have to be mean, if you have to weaponize a vulnerability of theirs and make a dig around it, it says a lot more about you, and it's no longer about the joke. It's kind of this, it just feels a little bit dark. And I felt like a lot of the comments that people were making about Rachel on the beach, outside of Avon, I think that Avon's impersonation of Rachel was maybe
very funny.
the kindest, it was the kindest roast. Those comments were actually super funny. But when it was about, I wish you were somebody else, or, this is,
oh my God,
it's not working for you this season, and having these really true qualities, it did feel like Rachel couldn't win in that moment. How can she reconcile her inauthentic trauma response, cool girl identity with who she really is, which is a person that is also really valued and celebrated in terms of her being emotional and truthful and leading with her vulnerability? You can't reconcile the two, because I do think she was trying to put on a very positive face, but it was probably a stinger for the person that she was coupled up with not to have her back or not to roast the other men. If Tanner really wanted to support Rachel, he could have been like, you guys all missed out on Rachel. Like, I have Rachel now. Yes! That would have been a roast. Why did he have to directly attack the person he has a crush on? We're not in elementary school. It's not cute to hurt somebody to say that you like them. Tanner was definitely, this is probably one of the worst insults I could say, but I can see why he was matched up with Kat. They have a mean streak in common. I'm just going to leave it at that. They have a mean streak in common, because that was so not okay what he said about Rachel. Like, I can't fathom a guy that I made out with, allowed to be vulnerable with, then tells me the thing that I'm really hurt about on national TV, my deepest wound of, I wish you were Gabby, or everybody had hoped you were Gabby, not you. That is something that she struggled with Gabby's season, because everybody said Gabby was so fun. Everybody critiqued Rachel. Tanner had to be the one to bring it up, not even one of the other guys. Come on.
Yeah, I'm
do better.
Sorry. That was do better. It was too far. That to me really turned me off from Tanner. I really do think that, I think several of these people really took it too far, but Tanner also, even his comment about Kat, I'm not a Kat fan. Kat pisses me off, but what Tanner said about Kat was, he criticized her Botox. I'm like, what is this? Are we really still in the era where we're making fun of women's appearances? Like, shut up, get out of here. Like, that is so, whatever, 2000s. We don't do that anymore. Like, that is so, it's giving misogyny. It's giving misogyny, to be honest. It's like, let me pit women against each other. Let me make fun of women's appearances as if I wasn't, like, literally 2 days ago making out with that Botox-filled face. Don't act like you don't like the way she looks. Don't expect women to look a certain way and then trash them for going through the effort to look a certain way. That is nasty to me. I was really turned off by Tanner. I'm sorry. This was like a little bit, those types of jokes, to your point, it's like, I love a roast. I think it can be really fun, but you have to really nail the humor right. You don't pick at someone's real insecurities. You don't target someone based on their identity and like the ways that they go about presenting themselves, gotta be really careful about it. And I do think that a lot of these people were like, this is a great opportunity for me to like show my like heinous misogyny and like people will laugh about it. And it's like, even Aaron B, like why was Aaron B trashing Rachel? I was like, this isn't, it's literally random and not funny. And I don't know, it's like you give someone a stage and they think that they can just say whatever horrible things cross their mind, and that's not what a roast is about. You got to be really select. Even John Henry did this too. He was like, Olivia, oh, you're still here. And it's like, wait a minute. She went to fucking bat for you. Like, Olivia cared so much about you, your well-being, making sure that you're okay. She was like nothing but kind to you. And what is this? I don't know. I just think these men, I was turned off by a lot of these guys at that roast.
I feel really comfortable saying that this is the worst season of Bachelor in Paradise I've ever seen.
Literally, there's not a single couple I am rooting for. It's like they'll show these happy scenes between Kylie and Aven. I'm like, I don't care. Or
no.
like whoever, Kat and John Henry, like, oh, look, they're really into each other. Okay. They've sucked all season. Why would I care about them having a happy ending? Like, it's like the show focused so much on the chaos and the drama and highlighting how much everyone sucks or bringing out the worst in all of these people. And then they want us to like be happy for them when they find love in the end after facing no consequences for their horrible behavior. I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, I have nothing to say about all of those couples that you've commented on because they're so unbelievable and immature in what we've seen on TV. And that's another disclaimer. We don't know these relationships that are playing out. What we're seeing is people saying that they're ready for these commitments. They have these connections, but it feels so superficial. The Kat, John Henry, the Blake and Jess thing, the Kylie and Aven. Kylie and Aven just they have some mean, like Kylie being so mean and just kind of really being a shark and going for Olivia and taking her down in really subtle ways. That feels very shady and weird to me. Aven has not been coming across looking great either. There's just something about all of these couples that feel like this has truly been one of the most high school, cliquey, immature dating seasons I've seen. There isn't really any camaraderie. I'm not really feeling it.
So we just talked about a bunch of different couples all at once as we've been talking about how much we're kind of not enjoying the season. But let us know down below, what do you think about, first of all, of Rachel's storyline on this season and everything that she has been through and how she's handling it on the beach? What do you think about our theories about the power dynamics going on between Rachel and the men and how she is handling her relationships with them? And let us know down below what you think about the couples on the beach. Is there anyone that you are rooting for? Any couples that you think are gonna make it off the beach? Let us know down below. We're very curious to hear what you all think.
So let's talk about Katie and Blake this episode because I felt like their conversation was one of the most interesting ones or the most interesting plot lines that happened this episode. So a little bit of backstory on Katie and Blake. She was a bachelorette. They got engaged on her season. They broke up because of distance. And there was a little bit of drama with her dating a contestant on her season, John Hershey, I believe immediately right after the breakup. And there was a little bit of Blake calling out Katie because I guess she had been hanging out with John Hershey while she was engaged to Blake. So that's the backstory. They hadn't spoken since their breakup. I think that was during COVID or like when she started dating someone else. And there was a little bit of them flinging a little bit of backhanded comments on different gossip blogs. So when she walked down the beach and she had a conversation with Blake, I felt like this man, just like Rachel, has been so exploited on the beach and they both cannot catch a break because he was already dealing with overwhelming feelings, figuring out how he felt about Jess. And then for Katie to come down, an ex he hadn't seen in years after I think he thought that she cheated on him and they never really had a closure conversation or some conversation that felt like they walked away from that feeling like they knew how the other person felt. It just happened really haphazardly. Yeah, it was very surprising to see a closure conversation because I do understand why they brought down Katie because she was spearheading this roasting section. I just felt like because Blake wasn't quite ready for it and he was already so overwhelmed in his relationship, and Katie was making a dig about Jess being so young compared to Blake, there was a little bit of, I don't know if this conversation was completely necessary or if he felt great having it. I think if anything, it added to his inner turmoil with Katie. And maybe Katie needed to have that conversation. It just felt like it's kind of that thing when your ex reaches out to you and they say, hey, do you want to get coffee, to either presumably get back together or just to have a conversation about how everything happened. That's something that two people say yes to. Your ex doesn't just show up at your house years later and tells you all of the things that happened. I'm so sorry. And now I'm going to roast your partner or the person that you're dating. You know, like it just felt like with Blake, he didn't have an opportunity to consensually opt in to that conversation of Katie. I think that he handled it the best way that he could. I just don't know if he walked away from that feeling great.
Yeah, I do think that, of course, I don't think she opted into it too. She didn't even know that he was going to be on the beach. She was like, it sounds like she was told that he might be there, was what she was told.
That's a good point.
And so when she was first arrived, Jessie was like, by the way, Blake is here. And she was like, oh, good. She didn't even seem that enthused about it. So I will say that I don't think it was necessarily her idea to initiate this conversation. And I think that production clearly wanted them to have this kind of awkward on-camera scene. And so they probably they were like, ooh, yeah, let's bring Katie on to host a roast, which will be great for the drama, but also we'll get this really juicy Blake-Katie storyline going on too. And so I do think they were both in a little bit of a like non-consensual closure conversation. Like it felt like both of them were a little bit flabbergasted as to what to say. Of course, you know, Katie knew she was coming, so it sounded like she had at least some general thoughts about what she would say if Blake was there. And I would say, personally, I think both of them handled it perfectly fine. She apologized for the things that had gone wrong in the relationship, and she like followed up on maybe some of their loose ends that maybe was like leaving her feeling unsettled, like, oh, I sent you those voice memos, I don't remember what was in them, but this is what anyways I wanted to say in that. So she, I guess, seized the opportunity to like communicate some last parting thoughts to Blake, which I think is fine because she's in the situation anyway. They're going to need to interact, and rather than make it awkward and like not interact with each other, might as well just like address it head on. She even kind of said it when she pulled him. She was like, let me just address the elephant in the room and pull Blake and talk to him. So I did feel like, you know, I don't know what else she could have done given that she was put in the situation. And to your point, I also think Blake, he is probably just still pretty hurt about things that Katie did in their breakup, or like the thing with John Hershey. And it sounds like he didn't want to necessarily like dredge it all up and like kind of counter anything she was saying. So he was just kind of like, okay, I'm uncomfortable. And she was like, I'm happy to see you. And he was like, I'm uncomfortable. So like, you know, it was definitely not balanced in that sense. But I also don't know. I don't really know how they could have handled it much better, given the fact that, to your point, neither of them, it wasn't like a, we have consensually decided to meet up for coffee to discuss what happened. It was like a, oh no, we're both here. I guess we need to talk.
That's a really good call out about Katie's body language, because I didn't get quite a sense. I mean, maybe because I was just like, oh my gosh, this is so exhausting seeing how much production manipulation is going on, that I had assumed that she had known that Blake was going to be on the beach or that there was going to be some conversation. But you're right, because of how disjointed it was. It went from her talking to Blake to then her talking to the contestants and making jokes, and everybody was like, wait, are you here to date or are you here to do something? And she had to tell people, oh, you can laugh at what I'm saying. Hannah Brown was on the beach and she got to do that weird, bonfire thing. Yeah, the bonfire. But she didn't have an ex that she needed to have this really big conclusive conversation to. And Blake and Katie, because theirs was marked by potential deception or ambiguity and vagueness, it felt like this was not, it was almost like a weird wasted opportunity, or like maybe the formatting of it just didn't happen correctly. It does feel like they're in a fun house or like a haunted house is going through these experiences, and it's so jarring, and then their exes are getting exactly, and then it's like the ex doesn't even know that they're there to scare them. They think they're there to do like another thing. Yeah, exactly. Like, am I supposed to do something with Blake? Then she was put through the reamer, because then the production was asking her, how did you feel about Blake? And she was a little bit teary-eyed thinking about the love that she feels for Blake and the discomfort of her coming back to host this thing, seeing him date this girl. It was just so weird all around.
Okay, I kind of enjoyed it, to be honest.
I love that you enjoyed it.
I was like, that's such great television. I love that. I thought it was really interesting and juicy to see Katie and Blake interact. Of course, it's like, to your point, it's like torture, pain, porn. Like, it's like, obviously they just want to like hurt these people. But I was intrigued to see the way they interacted, and it was Blake brings us at the end of the episode, he pulls Jess to talk to her. We don't know what they're going to say, but he kind of pulls Jess and starts saying that, like, how his feelings for Kate, remembering his feelings for Katie is making him rethink his relationship with Jess. I actually thought that was a really interesting takeaway from that interaction, because one thing that I will say about watching Katie and Blake interact was like, oh, this is what a real relationship looks like.
That's
as
deep.
Opposed
yeah.
that there is actually real feelings, history, like this depth of knowledge and experiences that they have had together. That felt so real to me, and it was like, honestly, part of me was like, I kind of
want them to get together.
I was like,
right.
If I'm rooting for any couple on this beach, it's these two. I was a little bit like, just moved by the emotion both of them were showing, and the fact that Blake, you know, considering he has kind of a bad taste in his mouth from how his relationship with her ended, the fact that he was still like, but damn, I really loved this girl, and like, I'm still like, I'm looking at you and remembering all the good stuff. I don't know, I was like kind of moved, and to me it felt like such a stark contrast from the superficiality of all the relationships on Bachelor in Paradise, and all the honestly, like, so many relationships that we see on this franchise feel so surface level and just don't feel like they have real meaningful depth there.
Yeah.
But with Katie and Blake, I was like, ooh, I forgot. This is what it looks like when like two people actually are on screen and actually have a history together, and they actually have this real relationship that has spanned years. And that was such a, I think, important contrast to have between that and the other relationships. And I think for Blake, it also put into stark contrast how real his relationship was with Katie in comparison to maybe what he's feeling or has going on with Jess. I mean, we don't know what he's going to say to her at this conversation. They made it a cliffhanger, but this was the type of random curveball throw in the drama moment by production that I was actually kind of like, ooh, this added something.
It did something.
To the, exactly. It like moved the pieces in a way that was, or moved the narrative, shifted the narrative in a way that was like helpful. It kind of like gave a dose of like reality back to this beach that's feeling so like, it's like goofy. Like right now, everything going on the beach just feels like, it's like watching like cartoons, you know, they just don't, nothing feels real. But what was going on between Kate, that scene of Katie, when I think the producer in the In a Moment interview asked, do you still love him? And she like looks away and tears up. I was like, that scene of her just like saying nothing, looking away, and then clearly getting choked up. This is one of the best scenes I've seen on television in a really long time, actually. That scene of Katie having that feeling, like just, my journalist, I have a journalism background, like that part of me like came back into my brain because I've interviewed lots of people on camera over the course of my years in that industry, and being able to see someone actually open up and have that kind of real, raw emotional response that carries so much depth and says so much, but without even saying any words, it's so hard to capture that. So I was a little bit like, wow, this is cinema. Like, this is cinema.
This is TV.
Yeah. I mean, not, obviously, I don't relish in anybody's pain, but it just felt so real.
Yeah, it was especially contrasted of all of the other scenes or relationships or conversations we've been able to witness. This was probably one of the realest conversations, and I think that's what makes it so, why it leaves such a lasting impression on us, the viewers, as we're watching it, because we can feel that they actually, when they got engaged, they knew what that meant to them in some way, and they knew what they were dedicating to each other in some way. It wasn't like they were getting engaged for the clout, which I will say, if any of them get engaged, that's what I'm thinking they'll do. It's for the clout or for the fantasy or for the fairy tale. That's not how it seemed Katie and Blake approached that engagement. It felt like it was weighed with something that was considerate and thought out, and this thing that you like really got to explore and take time for. Nothing else really compares to it on the beach, and so I am happy that they've had that scene. I just wish that maybe Katie was informed, or maybe Blake had a little bit of an opportunity to process it more, or yeah, I do think he's going to be doing a lot of processing of Jess. I have a suspicion that he is not going to commit to her, because he will, when something superficial is compared to something deep, there is no comparison, and it just is so obvious that despite Jess being a total sweetheart, they are not giving secure attachment. It's like vacation romance, really cute, short-term fling. I don't see much more.
An interesting contrast would be the Joe the grocer, Kendall, Serena situation. Like, I feel like that would be an interesting I guess like counterpoint to this like Katie, Blake, Jess thing, because I actually had a very similar feeling about Joe and Kendall as I did about Katie and Blake, which was, I was like, damn, like that's real. Like, I felt the emotion between Kendall and Joe when they first interact with each other, and like how all of those feelings were coming up, and they fell in love on that beach, and it was I was very moved and kind of sort of rooting for them to get back together. However, in spite of all that, Joe was like, no, I really like Serena, and I'm committed to seeing and exploring that and seeing that through. And the fact that he was so emphatic about that, to me, was what convinced me that, oh, maybe what's going on with him and Serena is actually real. The fact that he still sees Serena as something that is better or comparable to what he had with Kendall, it validated it in a way, versus what's happening with Blake and Jess. It's kind of like he's seeing the superficiality of his relationship with Jess. But let us know down below, what did you all think of this scene between Katie and Blake? What did you think about her coming down to the beach to have this closure conversation, or not to have the conversation, but ending up having this closure conversation with Blake? What do you think about the way Blake handled it and Katie handled it? And what do you think is going to happen with Blake and Jess next time we see them? Let us know down below. Let's keep the conversation going. We are off next week because it is Thanksgiving week, and so there is no Golden Bachelor and there is no Bachelor in Paradise, so we'll actually see you all 2 weeks from now to recap what I think is the season finale of Golden Bachelor. I don't think it's the season finale of Bachelor in Paradise. I could be wrong. I don't know.
But I don't think it is. I think there's still going on.
More to come with that one. But we will be back in 2 weeks to recap those episodes, and we'll see you then. Make sure you're subscribed if you aren't, so you don't miss it. And yeah, see you then.
Bye.
Bye.